In this module, we are discussing configuring the threat prevention options. What you will learn in this module is that we will identify the purpose of the quarantine manager, exclusions by the detection name, and any potentially unwanted programs that you want to detect. You'll also see how we can describe other ways to manage the quarantine items within the quarantine manager, and then how to configure the quarantine managers, configure the exclusions by the detection name, and the potentially unwanted detection settings as necessary to meet our customer requirements. The three main features in the threat prevention options that we're going to talk about is the quarantine manager, which actually allows us to perform many actions on any items that have been quarantined. Once again, the potentially unwanted program detections, we can customize our own potentially unwanted programs that we want to detect. And then if you want to exclude any unwanted programs from being detected, how you can set the exclusions for those. Always remember, you can configure this all for your centralized management from the EPO. Otherwise, you would configure this locally on the system for a standalone system. The Quarantine Manager is a tool in ENS that allows you to take actions on any quarantine threats. The quarantine items that can be in the Quarantine Manager can have different types of scanned objects. They can be files, cookies, registries, anything that basically was scanned for malware and detected that it may have malware in that particular file or threat. Basically, what happens is threat prevention will examine your item, determine that it's a threat, and if you'll recall, you should create your steps to be try to clean it, and if it cannot clean it, then delete it. But technically, it is not actually deleted. It will be deleted from the location where it was, but you actually have a copy of it in a non-executable format in a folder called Quarantine. It will be in that folder until removed, or we have it where it will age out of the database, which is a configured setting. Basically, you can actually go in and manually delete it. You can restore it to its original location manually or automatically by using a restore task from EPO, because maybe it was a false detection, and so the file or the threat was unintentionally scanned and determined to have a threat, and it really didn't have the threat. So you can actually get it where it was restored back because you have a new updated signature, and that signature says, oh, this is not a false detection. And also you can manually rescan if you have a new DAT update, and maybe that DAT update may be able to clean that particular file. A potentially unwanted program, or PUP, is any piece of code which a reasonably security or privacy-minded computer user may want to be informed of, and in some cases removed. Some examples are adware, where basically people have this pop-up of adware and they're targeting your user. It gets revenue from either the vendor or vendor's partners. They can capture and transmit any personal information. Or a dialer, which will redirect your internet connection to a party other than their default ISP. And what they do is those are designed to add connection charges for a content provider, vendor, or any other third party. A joke, which jokes generally are not supposed to be malicious, but they could harm your computer. They don't really affect the security or privacy, but they might alarm or annoy the user. You may have recalled in the past that there's been lots of different types of jokes that seemed innocent enough, and it turned out that there was actually something malicious within that joke. A keylogger is a good example, where it can intercept the data between the user entering it and the intended recipient application. And so any Trojan horse or potentially unwanted program keylogger might be acting like the same way. So we can detect both of those types to prevent any intrusions that might intrude on your privacy. And a password cracker. This enables a user or administrator to recover a lost or forgotten password. Many times if you see where this has detected a password cracker, It may indicate that you have maybe an insider threat because somebody has a tool that they're trying to maybe gain access to all the passwords on a system, or it could be an attacker that's trying to get the passwords. And once again, a potentially unwanted program, it could be legitimate software. It's not really malware related, but the problem is it might alter the state of your security on your particular system. And the thing is they can actually have where there's certain things about that potentially unwanted program that a company doesn't want to have, such as a remote desktop tool or remote admin tool or anything like that. We also have remote admin tools, which they are another type of unwanted program, because this is where I can get remote control access of another system. Other types of detections are like spyware, which will transmit your personal information to a third party without you knowing, and so you can get a lot of pop-ups. It also can make it where it'll really slow down the different computers. It can route HTTP requests to advertising sites and so on. Stealth is another type of virus that will attempt to avoid detection, but it can be also referred to as an interrupt interceptor. So it's a stealth virus that intercepts any disk access requests. And so many times it will try to hide the different files, and the virus will actually show a clean image of whatever requested item. Other types of viruses might hide the actual size of an infected file and display the size before it actually gets infected. And then a Trojan horse is a program that tries to pretend he's a benign application. He doesn't replicate, but he can cause damage and compromise the security of your computer. And typically what happens is a person or their computer becomes infected the minute the person opens the Trojan attachment in email or they downloaded it, and it also might be infected having to do with peer-to-peer networking. Trojans don't necessarily replicate themselves, so they're not normally considered a virus. If you're managing the threat prevention options policy, you have the two policies within EPO, the McAfee default, which is always the read-only policy, and the duplicate of the McAfee default named the My Default, which you can edit that policy from the beginning. And then, of course, you can always create your own policies by duplicating one of these. To configure the policy for the Quarantine Manager, your two settings that you have in here is the actual folder, and if you'll notice, you can actually click the drop down and select different options like system drive, the system root, the system folder, program files, software install folder, wherever you want. You can define some different locations. Otherwise, you can leave the default of system drive. And the default name of the folder is quarantine. This folder will not exist from the moment you install ENS. It will exist the moment that the ENS product finds a malicious file and then quarantines it. The specify the maximum number of days to keep the quarantine data is the option for you to age out the files. So what you do is you can change this if the 30 days is not what you desire, and if you'll notice, you can have it from 1 day to 999 days. The thing is the files will actually be put in the quarantine folder, and they will be encrypted, and an end user cannot access the files outside of the Quarantine Manager interface. As we said before, you can manage the quarantine files directly from the ENS client by opening up the Quarantine Manager interface. And if you'll notice, you have these options to click delete, restore, or rescan. Ideally, before you even try to restore a file, we always recommend that you try to rescan it first after you've had a new data update. You can even look at the item in the event log. You can get more information about that item from our McAfee Labs website. If you browse to the particular folder, you will see that it has all of the files in there that are encrypted. If you try to expand those files, which you can actually see the whole folder structure of where that file was originally detected. But if you try to do anything within the Windows Explorer interface, it will prompt you for a password. The only way that you could restore the file is you can use the interface of the ENS client or a restore client task from EPO. But if the file is still infected, ENS will detect it again and quarantine it again. In this slide, you'll see that we actually have a screenshot of where do you go in the client task catalog, and you can create your restore from quarantine client task. The options are that you give it a name, give it a description, and then you have to know what is the actual item that you want to restore. You may need to have to put in the account name and password so that because maybe there might be some restriction on the ability to restore that file. And as always, set the assignment and the schedule within the system tree. To configure any potentially unwanted programs that you want to detect that are not normally in our DATs, you can go to the policy, you can click the Add button, and select one or more custom unwanted programs. Unfortunately, you cannot do a browse button. You actually have to type in the file name and you put in a description and then save it. If you want more granularity, we would recommend that you use the access protection rules for your detection. Just understand these scanners will detect different types of programs as well as any of the programs that are specified in our AM core content files. They do not detect any 0-byte user-defined potentially unwanted programs. In this little situation, suppose you have where there's a specific detection that is being detected as an unwanted program, but it's a tool that you really need to use in your environment. So what you can do is look at the events, see what the name is for that particular file, and then you can go to the policy and create an exclusion by that detection name. And if you'll notice, select the option to overwrite the exclusions that are configured on the client. In order to find the information on the program you want to exclude, refer to either the local event log on the system or review the updated event on the EPO server in the thread event log. Queries are also very useful in finding information about the uploaded event. Note that the option to overwrite the exclusions configured on the client is disabled by default. Check your understanding, true or false. It is recommended to rescan a quarantine item before restoring it. That would be true. If you recall, we did mention that before, that ideally, before you're going to try to restore it, update your DATs to the latest DATs and AM core, and then you can rescan the item and see if maybe what it can do is automatically clean that item for you. Check your understanding, multiple choice, choose the correct answer. A file that has the delete option executed upon it by the threat prevention is A. Permanently deleted from the system, B. Moved to the recycle bin, C. Deleted and a copy saved in quarantine, D. Hidden from normal view until restored. The correct answer is deleted and a copy saved in the quarantine. If you recall, basically what we have is that it's 1 to 999 days that it can be in that quarantine folder, and then it's automatically aged out according to your policy that you set. Check your understanding, true or false. The scanners do not detect 0-byte user-defined pups. Is that true or is that false? The answer is true. If you'll recall, we mentioned to you before that they do not detect 0-byte user-defined potentially unwanted programs. In review, key points that we'd like you to remember is threat prevention cleans or deletes items that are detected as threats and saves a copy in a non-executable format in the quarantine folder. The quarantine manager is a tool that you have that manages the quarantine items that are in that folder. You can manage the quarantine items from the client. For example, I can delete, restore, rescan. I can even view the item in the event log and get more information about that item from our McAfee Labs website. It is recommended to rescan an item before restoring it from quarantine. You can create a client task from EPO to restore the quarantine items based on the detection name, and you can configure that task to run immediately or at a specific scheduled time. Potentially unwanted programs are any piece of code that is reasonably security or privacy minded computer user may want to be informed of, and in some cases removed. You can also specify your own potentially unwanted programs you want the ENS to detect. The scanners detect specified programs as well as programs specified in the AM core content files. They do not detect 0-byte user-defined pubs. You can specify the exclusions by detection name and optionally overwrite exclusions on the client.